In May of 1925, a man sat in a high-end suite at the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the most exclusive addresses in Paris. He wasn't there for a vacation. He was there to commit a crime so bold, so technically impossible, that it would eventually become a masterclass in the psychology of the con. His name was Victor Lustig, but the world would soon know him as the man who sold the Eiffel Tower. Not once, but twice. Think about the sheer nerve that takes. Most people feel a twinge of anxiety when they lie about being sick to skip work. Lustig, on the other hand, was sitting across from 5 of the biggest scrap metal dealers in France, convincing them that the most iconic landmark in the world was being sold for parts. To understand how he did it, you have to look at the silent witnesses in the room. Lustig didn't just walk in and start talking. He had high-quality, forged government stationery. He had a fake persona as the deputy director of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He even picked the Hôtel de Crillon specifically because it was where international diplomats met. He was using environmental anchoring, creating a space so credible that the victims' brains didn't even think to ask for ID. At the time, Paris was in a weird spot. The Eiffel Tower was never meant to be permanent. It was built for the 1889 World's Fair, and by 1925, it was rusting. The city was complaining about the cost of its upkeep. Lustig read a small newspaper clipping about this struggle and saw an opening. To him, that news report wasn't just information. It was a roadmap to a fortune. He invited these 5 dealers to the hotel under the guise of state secrecy. This was his first psychological hook, the insider secret. People love feeling like they know something the public doesn't. He told them the government couldn't afford the repairs and had decided to quietly sell the tower for scrap. One man in the group, André Poisson, was the perfect mark. He was a new money guy, a striver who wanted to be in the big leagues of the Parisian business world. Lustig smelled that insecurity immediately. In psychology, we call this cognitive empathy. Lustig wasn't feeling what Poisson felt. He was simply reading the data of Poisson's personality. He saw that Poisson didn't just want the medal. He wanted the prestige of being the man who handled the deal of the century. But Poisson had a moment of doubt. He felt something was off. So, Lustig did something brilliant. He didn't double down on the official talk. Instead, he leaned in and confessed that as a government official, he didn't make much money and needed a little extra to make sure the contract went to the right person. This is the sunk cost loophole. By asking for a bribe, Lustig made the deal feel real. In Poisson's world, corrupt officials were a reality. A clean official selling a landmark was suspicious, but a corrupt one? That made perfect sense. Poisson handed over a check for the bribe and the down payment for the tower. We're talking about a sum that, in today's money, would easily exceed $1 million. Enough to buy a fleet of luxury apartments in the heart of Manhattan. Lustig took the check, cashed it, and hopped on a train to Vienna within the hour. He sat in his cabin, probably sipping a drink, waiting for the headlines to scream about the fraud. He waited for the police to start a manhunt. He waited for the scandal to break the internet of the 1920s. But as the days passed, something strange happened. The newspapers stayed quiet. There was no mention of the ministry being defrauded. There was no alarm. Victor Lustig sat in his hotel in Austria, looking at the morning papers, realizing that his plan had worked better than he ever imagined. But he wasn't satisfied with just winning. He began to wonder, if the world didn't know he did it even happen? And more importantly, if he got away with it once, What was stopping him from doing it again? The silence from Paris wasn't because the crime wasn't discovered. It was because of something much more human and much more dangerous. And as Victor started packing his bags to head back to the very city that should have been hunting him, he realized he hadn't just sold a landmark. He had discovered a flaw in the human psyche that he could exploit forever. But his next move wouldn't just involve scrap metal. It would involve the most dangerous man in America, and a game of chicken that most people wouldn't survive. Victor knew that you don't scam a man like Al Capone for $50,000. You scam him for something much more valuable: his trust. In the mid-1920s, Capone wasn't just a local tough guy. He was the CEO of a criminal empire built on lead and illegal liquor. If you crossed him, you didn't just lose your job. You lost your life. But Victor walked into the Lexington Hotel like he owned the place. He sat across from a man who had dozens of people buried in the Illinois soil and pitched a simple investment. He needed $50,000, roughly $850,000 in today's currency, to double it in 60 days. Capone, surprisingly, handed it over. But he gave Victor a look that said everything. If that money didn't come back with interest, Victor would be more than just broke. He'd be a memory. Now, here's where the psychology of the long con really shows its teeth. Victor didn't take that money and run. He didn't gamble it. He didn't even invest it. He took those 50 crisp $1,000 bills, put them in a safe deposit box, and let them sit in the dark for 2 months. Think about the nerves that takes. Every single day for 60 days, he knew he was one bad mood away from a shallow grave, yet he didn't touch a single cent. He was playing a different game entirely. When the 60 days were up, Victor returned to Capone's office. He didn't look like a winner. He looked tired. He looked defeated. He placed the original stack of bills on the desk and told the King of Chicago, "The plan failed. I've lost my own money, but here is yours, every cent." Capone was stunned. In his world, everyone was a parasite. Everyone was trying to skim off the top or find a way to take a piece of his pie. And here was this refined, soft-spoken gentleman returning a fortune simply because he was honest. Capone was so impressed, or perhaps so manipulated by the rare display of integrity, that he handed Victor $5,000 just to help him get back on his feet. Victor walked out of that hotel with $5,000 of clean, safe money. But more importantly, he now had the most powerful shield in the world: Al Capone's respect. He had successfully hacked the psychology of a predator. He realized that if you can convince a wolf you're a sheep with a conscience, the wolf will protect you from the rest of the pack. But that $5,000 wasn't enough for a man with Victor's appetite. He moved to New York and started scaling his operations. He wasn't just selling landmarks or tricking mobsters anymore. He went after the very foundation of the American economy, the currency itself. He partnered with a chemist named Tom Shaw and began producing counterfeit $100 bills so perfect that they bypassed almost every security measure of the time. They were flooding the market with Lustig money, moving hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, millions in modern value. It was the perfect crime, and for a while, Victor was a ghost. He was living a double life, maintaining a family in one state and a high society mistress in another. He thought he was untouchable because he understood everyone's price. He didn't realize that his greatest weakness wasn't the Secret Service or the FBI. It was a small, handwritten note, a silent witness to a betrayal he never saw coming. As he stood on a street corner in New York, waiting for a contact, he saw 2 men in dark suits approaching. They didn't look like mobsters. They looked like the government. And as the handcuffs clicked, Victor realized the one person he hadn't accounted for in his psychological equations was the one person who knew him best. But the real surprise wasn't that he'd been caught. It was where he was going, and the impossible escape he was already planning. Witness to a betrayal he never saw coming. As he stood on a street corner in New York, waiting for a contact, he saw two men in dark suits approaching. They didn't look like mobsters. They looked like the government. And as the handcuffs clicked, Victor realized the one person he hadn't accounted for in his psychological equations was the one person who knew him best. But the real surprise wasn't that he'd been caught. It was where he was going, and the impossible escape he was already planning. The person who turned him in wasn't a rival or a detective who finally out-hustled him. It was his mistress, Billy May. She'd found a love letter from another woman in Victor's pocket, and her jealousy did what the police couldn't do for decades. She called the Secret Service and told them exactly where he'd be. It's a classic human error. The man who could manipulate entire governments couldn't manage the emotions of the person sitting across from him at breakfast. Most people, when they get thrown into the federal house of detention in Manhattan, start looking for a lawyer. Victor started looking for a laundry list. He realized that the human brain has a specific blind spot. We don't see people who look like they're working. He fashioned a rope out of silk bed sheets he'd managed to keep in his cell. On the day of his move, he didn't sneak out under the cover of night. He stepped out of a window in broad daylight, several stories above the pavement. As he lowered himself down the side of the building, he didn't rush. He pulled out a rag and actually started wiping the windows as he descended. People walking by on the New York sidewalk looked up, saw a man cleaning the glass, and simply kept walking. To them, he wasn't a fugitive. He was just another guy earning a paycheck. He hit the ground, tossed the rag, and vanished into the crowd. He was a free man for 27 days, living as a ghost in a city that was supposed to have him under lock and key. But the game eventually had to end. When they finally cornered him in Pittsburgh, the federal government decided they'd had enough of his theatrics. They sent him to the one place designed to break the world's most difficult men, Alcatraz. On that island, the man who once sold the Eiffel Tower twice became just a number. Prisoner 118. He went from sipping the finest cognac in Parisian hotels to sitting in a damp cell where the only sound was the cold wind off the bay. The psychological toll was heavy. The man who lived for the buzz of the con now had no one to trick but himself. He spent years there, his health slowly fading, until he was eventually transferred to a medical facility in Missouri. When he passed away in 1947, there was no grand funeral. But the most haunting part of his entire life isn't found in his crimes. It's found on his death certificate. In the little box where the state asks for an occupation, someone wrote 2 words: apprentice salesman. It was the ultimate quiet insult. After stealing what would be millions of dollars in today's value, the system got the last word. To the state, he wasn't a genius or a count. He was a trainee who never finished his work. But don't let that official record fool you. Victor Lustig's real legacy is in the 10 commandments he left for those who follow in his footsteps. He understood that the easiest way to bypass someone's logic was to mirror their ego. He proved that if you agree with someone's politics, they'll trust you with their life. We think we're more sophisticated today with our high-tech security and encryption. But Victor's ghost is still in the machine. Every time a scammer uses a tiny bit of personal info to gain your trust, they are using Victor's playbook. He proved that the most vulnerable part of any system isn't the lock on the door. It's the person holding the key. He didn't just break the law. He mapped out the flaws in human nature. And the truth is, most of us still haven't learned how to fix them.